Greetings! So nice, isn't it? My dear friend. So precious and sweet looking. Isn't he adorable? My darling, darling Foxy Foxington. Oh, you're the most precious, beautiful thing in the world. Yes. Yes, yes, yes you are. What was I talking about? Oh, yes. I have more advice for you. This time, instead of concerning issues you may be facing in day-to-day life, this is a more it's advice for creative people, writers, poets, and the like. Creative advice, you might call it. No, I couldn't think of a way of ending that sentence, and no, I don't care. Watch it, you. Okay. No. Right. What? Oh, yeah. Creative advice. Right. Oh, right. Well, for poets and people who incorporate a large amount of metaphor into their descriptions and so forth, would be one thing you could do is just, I don't know, make a list of metaphors. You know, write down, just go out of your way to think of metaphors for things. Write them down and, you know, if you're stuck for one, you can always just refer to your list. For help with character motivations, well, if the character is fleshed out enough in your mind, then simply summon their image to the fore and ask of them what it is they might do in that situation. Heck, I was able to ask one of them their name, because I couldn't think of a name for them. And they knew their own name, and they told me. And their name was Sylvia. I mean, she already had a title of sorts. Grandmother Winterthorn, a character in one of my novels. Turns out her first name is Sylvia. What else? Well, this went nowhere, didn't it? Well, there must be some other exercises. Yes, here's something. If you're stuck at a point in your story, you've hit a wall and you don't know how to climb it, or dig under it, or break it down, what you should try doing is, instead of fixating on this situation, even if you're like me and you can't write another part of the novel without writing this part first, separate yourself from it. Get some scrap paper or a notebook or some such, or open a new document, whatever, and just transpose your character or other characters from that work into a new situation. See how they deal with that. It might help you work out how they deal with this. The mind works in mysterious ways. Things that may seem irrelevant to one another can be connected. And this is a very good way to draw inspiration. Find the connections, the hidden strings tying everything together, and all will be well. Another really good piece of advice is be confident in your work, but at the same time try and be objective. A good way to achieve this is, instead of dilly-dallying over, oh, is this good, just write the chapter or the section that you're working on. Then, when you're going back over it, don't read it with the eye of a creator. Read it with the eye of the audience, the target. Read it with the eye of the one to whom these words would go. If it sounds good from the perspective of the reader, then it doesn't need a drastic change. Although this doesn't mean you shouldn't tune it up. I periodically, well, I say periodically, sometimes I'll go back over older parts of my book and I'll tune them up so that they're as good as the more recent parts. And this can actually help inspire you for stuff to happen in the future. It's interesting, actually, the way the mind flows like that, you know? It's very interesting. Some people might find it helpful to work on something else for a while. Personally, I don't. If I work on more than one thing at once, then they both lose quality very quickly. They just get kind of weird. Like, let's say I was writing something that was originally, and in the themes and tone of the first chapter or two, was intended to be a horror story or a thriller or some such. Quite often I find that if I went away to work on something else because I'd gotten stuck with that, when I came back, even if the other thing I'd been working on was thematically similar or part of the same genre, it ended up writing itself as a drama, or a comedy, or a slice of life. It's weird, but it happens. It's really annoying. I have so many manuscripts that have only made it to, like, chapter 3 before I've had to just completely scrap them. I mean, I'm keeping the first chapter or two, because the first chapter was good. The premise was good. I just need to find a way to focus in and keep it tonally consistent. Tonal consistency is important. Don't be afraid to take too long in between writing sessions. I mean, if you work too hard at it, the ideas may end up being a little cruder. Of course, that's just me. I prefer to wait a while with an idea, really think it over, make sure it's perfect before I put it to paper, put it to words. Other people may prefer to write a little every day, or something, you know? Everyone has their own way of working, and it's important that instead of adhering to someone else's method, you honor your own. That's a good way to make sure that your writing is true to yourself, you know? I don't really have any advice for people who write more sort of formal works. You know? People who write essays or you know, non-fiction pieces. I don't really have terrible amount of advice for you. My advice mostly pertains to narrative or poetry. Not so much with the self-help books or documentaries, that kind of thing. I just don't know how to write those. I've tried and they've come out just so bad. As for poetry, well, my poems tend to be free verse, you know? So, not terribly structured. And I don't actually write a lot of poetry. I guess I'll just stick to offering advice for people working on prose, since that's where my talent truly shines. I mean, I can write poetry, it's not exactly Shakespeare. What else? Well, something that might help get your creative juices flowing is, instead of working on an event, work on a character. Look to a side character, one who's not very fleshed out yet, and as a creative assignment, not necessarily something that will end up in the in the finished product. Just look at them, examine them, and imagine if they were the protagonist, you know? Build a short story around one of the side characters. Just as an exercise in perspective, for one thing. Doing this with the antagonist can be very interesting. Can be really helpful with motivations and things. For example, if I were to take one of the antagonists of my book series, of which I've only written the first 7 chapters of the first book, but still, it's a series in my head. If I take, say, Fenrir, the antagonist of the first book, hasn't really done much yet. Well, I guess he's not really the antagonist then, is he? I mean, the final conflict will revolve around him, but... well, no matter. There's a lot about him I don't know yet, so I could look at his past, look at his history, or see what it is he's up to, you know? In a similar vein, especially if you're working with fantasy or science fiction, you might want to think about elements in the world, you know? The histories of those things. And that's how I built up this complex system of deities and spirits and things. And it's how I learnt about how the wolf spirits fled from the forest, all kinds of things about the world's history. And that's really helpful because then you can feed those into the main work. Something that comes up a lot in Angie Sage's work, which I think is very interesting. I mean, most good writing would have a balance of round characters to you know, do things and flat characters to keep things focused. Angie Sage, however, it's hard to explain. None of her characters are flat. They're all really fleshed out. However, the roundness of a character only comes into play when it's relevant. A shopkeeper, or what have you, would, in interaction with the main protagonist, be fairly flat, maybe have 2 or 3 things about them. Enough to pique curiosity, but not enough to distract focus. And then at the end of the book, there'd be all these little short kind of denouement. These kind of epilogues. Just for the little side characters being like, what did this guy do? You know, they're really good. I'm not selling it properly at all. I really do recommend her works, though. They're absolutely flipping amazing. So, yeah. That's quite a lot of tips I think I've given you. So, feel free to discuss amongst yourselves in the comments section. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. On, this. Ciao!